Hello everybody, happy History Hump Day. We are studying, history. That's crazy because that's why they called it Hump Day, because you're supposed to study history on Wednesday or somewhere in the week. You're supposed to study history. It's like a good thing apparently. Well, so we're starting with history, trying to start at the beginning. We're in like the 17th century, which is not the beginning. It's very actually almost at the end. But it's looking at the difference, the intellectual battle. We're looking at the intellectual battle of the civilization European way versus the indigenous tribe, or at least the way some tribes did it. There were some debates. There were some people going back and forth and writings and stuff. It's really interesting. I mean, who knew? I didn't know about this, but it's kind of cool. And I guess that represents the beginning of human history because we look at how life was before civilization, and the Native Americans can kind of show us maybe a glimpse, because it's kind of hard to know, like way back in time, when things were really old and ancient language, so we just look at the Native Americans. Maybe that's kind of a picture of how life was before civilization, before modern technology ruined us. Although, would you go back? That's the question. Obviously, right now, I'm like, I don't think I would want to live as a hunter-gatherer, but maybe I would, because like they said, like we've talked about previously in this book, by the way, credit to this book, there you go, Dawn of Everything. They were talking about how people who were adopted into indigenous tribes from European places, or vice versa, the people who they would always want to go back to the hunter-gatherer. Either they'd go back if they were kidnapped to the Europeans, or if they were kidnapped the other way, they would want to stay with the hunter-gatherer. So people basically were happier in those days. And that's what these two people, there's two guys that had intellectual debates. Supposedly, some people say they were made up. But there was a French guy named... Hold on, this is his name. Louis Armand de Lhomme d'Arc, Baron de la Hontan. Dude, you don't have to have every name that from your uncle and your great-great-grandfather. You can give up some names. So they call him Lahontan. He could have just been called Lahontan. I guess that's what they call him, because nobody's going to be saying that whole name to refer to him. Louis Armand de la Baron de la Hontan. Come here. No. And then there was a guy. So this guy was French. Obviously, you can tell by the name. And he learned about the indigenous, specifically the Wendat tribe, I think is how you pronounce it. And he learned their language, how to talk to them. And there was the guy kind of in charge of that tribe or something. He was like the political guy for them. He was an indigenous guy that was highly respected. His name was Kindiaronk. A little shorter. Appreciate that it's a little shorter. So they had a lot of like intellectual debates about their way of life. Christianity, they debated about Christianity, which obviously I agree with Christianity. Kindiaronk brings up some objections that I think he might be I think he's misunderstanding Christianity, but also, Lahontan goes against the Jesuits, who were, I don't know, more of the anti-freedom, forceful type of Christians. So Lahontan doesn't agree with them, and it's possible, some people think that he wrote down all these dialogues, and people think he made them up because he wanted to object to Christianity or European ways without actually objecting to it, like making up, this guy's objecting to it, and I'm just having a dialogue with him. But anyway, this book thinks that it was probably true, because a lot of people really respected this Kindiaronk guy. And he visited France. There's a lot of evidence that he visited France, and a lot of people there respected him, like they just saw how he could debate really well. And he does seem actually pretty wise. He's kind of like the Socrates from the Native Americans. It seems like he's just really wise. But also, I don't agree with his objection to Christianity, but he does have good objections to modern living, which is interesting. So, let's see. So he wrote down all these things. What is some of the stuff that they have the dialogues written down. Okay. Kondiaronk. Come on, my brother. Don't get up in arms. It's only natural for Christian... Okay, this is his objection to Christianity. He says Christians have faith in the Holy Scriptures because from their infancy they were taught about it. However, having thought long and hard over the course of a decade about the Jesuits, what the Jesuits have told us of the life and death of a son of the Great Spirit, I don't know what... I can't really understand. I don't understand. They have such a different language. He's like, for myself, I've always held that if it were possible that God had lowered his standards sufficiently to come down to earth, he would have done it in full view of everyone. He would have gone from nation to nation performing mighty miracles, basically making it very obvious that Christianity is the true religion. So his objection, and this is the interesting thing where I think he's wrong, his objection to Christianity is that there's so many religions and everybody thinks that theirs is right. Basically, that's his objection. It's like, well, yeah, but just because everybody thinks that they're right doesn't mean that nobody's right. Someone could still be right, and it could be the Christians. And it is the Christians, because, there's way more evidence for the Bible than for any other religion. But, so that's an interesting objection. But there's also his objection to the laws in the Europeans, which this is where I'm like, he might have a point. But Lahontan brings up a good point too. He says, this is why the wicked need to be punished and the good need to be rewarded. Otherwise, murder, robbery, and defamation would spread everywhere, right? It makes sense that you would want to punish the bad. But Kondiaronk says, for my own part, I find it hard to see why you would be much more miserable than you already are. So he's like, look, you're already miserable. You think that it would be miserable without laws, but you're already miserable with the laws. What kind of a human, what species of creatures must Europeans be that they have to be forced to do good and only refrain from evil because of fear of punishment? So that probably shows you the difference in the belief about original sin. As Christians, if you think that everybody's born a sinner, then you just have to have laws. It's like you can't just say, well, just do good because it's good. But his solution would be, you have observed that we lack judges. What is the reason for that? Well, we never bring lawsuits against one another. And why do we never bring lawsuits? Well, because we made a decision either to accept or make use of money. Oh, money, that was like a big thing. Why do we refuse to allow money into our communities? The reason is this: we are determined not to have laws. Because since the world was a world, our ancestors have been able to live contentedly, is that how you say that? Without them. His main objection is against money and gold and silver representing the goods and services that you need, which I kind of agree with that, because I don't agree with this book is like, well, obviously, even you might say, okay, so the Wendat tribe doesn't have laws at all, like they just let people get away. No, they still do, but they deal with it differently. It's not as structured. But also, this book made a good point that when people argue with one another, they might have slightly different ways. It's more of a spectrum of difference. But when you argue, then you get more no, I'm way different than you, and then the other side says, no, I'm way different, to make it seem like you're way different. You're really fundamentally not different. You still have laws to punish the bad, because people are going to do bad. It's just the way that they handle it. So Kondiaronk, his main objection is with money, which is interesting because it's why do we have money? Who came up with that? Let's just have this thing represent bread instead of just trading bread with horses and stuff. I get it would make it easier and more convenient, but the way they did it back in the day for so many thousands of years, where they didn't do the money thing and the gold, although gold has been around for a long time too. So maybe it's just always been part of human culture that we're well, let's see, we can't, sometimes trading stuff maybe doesn't work, so you have to have some random piece of rock that everyone decides is valuable. And they're here, I'll give you some of my rock if you give me what I need. I don't know. But it's really cool to read what Kondiaronk has to say. So here's some more of what he has to say. I've spent 6 years reflecting on the state of European society, and I still can't think of a single way they act that's not inhumane. Whoa, dude. But probably true. Back in the day. We're way better now. We've gotten better. Probably thanks to your thoughts, your dialogue. And I genuinely think this can only be the case as long as you stick to your distinction of mine and thine. I affirm that what you call money is the devil of devils, the tyrant of the French, the source of all evil, the bane of souls and slaughterhouse of the living. To imagine one can live in the country of money and preserve one's soul is like imagining one could preserve one's life at the bottom of a lake. Money is the father of luxury, lasciviousness, whatever that means. Blah, blah, blah. It's father of all this bad stuff. Fathers sell their children, husbands their wives, wives betray their husbands, brothers kill each other, friends are false, and all because of money and the like. That's true. But that it lines up with Christianity, though. So Kondirek is really close, because the Bible says that money is the root of all evil. So money existed way back in the Bible times, too. And God knew that it was the root of all evil. If you're a hunter-gatherer, maybe you're just more likely to not turn super evil. Like, everybody's born sinful, but there's certain things that you can, ways of life that you can live where you don't become super evil and depraved, to where you take over and get all, like, if you have all this modern technology, you can take over the world, and then, Holocaust and all that stuff. But if you're don't have anything, if everybody's poor, then it's harder to become really evil. But also, okay, then Lahontan brings a good point. He says, try for once in your life to actually listen. Try for once in your life to actually listen, he says in a French accent. Can't you see, my dear friend, that the nations of Israel, Israel, Europe, I just was like thinking Bible times, the nations of Israel. The nations of Europe could not survive without gold and silver, or some similar precious symbol. See, this is kind of what I thought originally. He says, without it, nobles, priests, and merchants, and any number of people who lack strength to work the soil would simply die of hunger. Our kings would not be kings. What soldiers would we have? Who would work for kings or anybody else? It would plunge Europe into chaos and create the most dismal confusion imaginable. So that's the point that I've always thought. We need really rich people. We need the billionaires. We need the nobles and the merchants who are super rich and do it out of greed. And you could say the greed is rewarded, but you could also see it from a flip side, that their greed, they use their greed even though it's completely for selfish reasons. It ends up helping everybody in the end, right? Because there was probably maybe less hunger in Europe at the time, thanks to civilization. So that would be one reason. But also, is that what life is about, not being hungry? Kinda. I don't know. But also, okay, you live a short, fulfilled life that's, you're hungry all the time, or do you want a long, luxurious life, but you're miserable? Is kind of Kondirek. And then Kondirek responds, you honestly think that you're going to sway me by appealing to the needs of nobles and merchants? If you abandoned conceptions of mine and thine, which is like private property, yes, such distinctions between men would dissolve. A leveling equality would then take its place among you as now does among the Wendat. And yes, for the first 30 years after the banishing of self-interest, no doubt you would need to be a certain desolation as those who are only qualified to eat, drink, sleep, and... Wait, now I'm not understanding. Hold on, where does he get... Over and over I have set forth the qualities that Wendat believe ought to define humanity: wisdom, reason, equity, and demonstrated that the existence of separate material interests knocks all those on the head. A man motivated by interest cannot be a man of reason. Interesting. So, the greed actually messes with your mind. If you have access to being able to be greedy, maybe? Anyway. But obviously, like the book says, okay, they're not perfectly equal in the indigenous tribes either. It's not like they don't have any greed. It's just harder to be greedy, maybe. So, I don't know. I understand both sides, But also, what would you rather... I'm really trying to decide, because I go back and forth every day. I'm like, sometimes I would never want to live in the hunter-gatherer, and die of hunger. But also, maybe life would be better. I don't know. So that was an interesting back and forth between Lahontan and Kondirek, the French guy and the indigenous guy. I probably didn't summarize it very well, but you can read it in this book. It's very interesting. So, I don't know. What do y'all think? Would y'all want to be? Do y'all think modern technology is bad, like this phone?